In order to fully grasp why Beijing has been steadfast in its refusal to back down to the tariffs imposed by the U.S., we must first understand the economic imperatives driving China's response. These motivations are not only rooted in short-term trade issues but also in a broader strategy to solidify China's position in the global economy. China's economic rebalancing strategy. Over the past few decades, China has undergone a fundamental transformation, transitioning from being a low-cost manufacturing hub to becoming a dominant player in high-tech industries. This shift in focus has been at the heart of China's long-term economic goals, with significant investments in emerging sectors like artificial intelligence, AI, renewable energy, electric vehicles, and biotech. In fact, the Made in China 2025 initiative is one of the key drivers of China's economic growth, aiming to reduce dependence on foreign technologies and increase self-sufficiency in high-tech industries. By refusing to buckle under the pressure of U.S. tariffs, Beijing is signaling its resolve to continue with its rebalancing agenda. The tariffs are viewed as an obstacle, but one that won't deter China's ambitions. In fact, the trade war has been framed within China as an external challenge that only accelerates the nation's desire to innovate and reduce its reliance on foreign technology. As of 2025, China's technological capabilities are seen as a competitive edge on the global stage, from AI and quantum computing to 5G networks. Furthermore, China's ability to weather the economic impacts of these tariffs has improved over the years. As its domestic market matures and consumption levels rise, China has gradually reduced its reliance on exports to the U.S. This shift has helped buffer the impact of tariffs, allowing Beijing to pursue its strategic interests without the same degree of vulnerability as in the past. Manufacturing power and trade diversification. China is also a critical player in global supply chains. Many industries across the world rely on Chinese manufacturing capabilities, from electronics and machinery to textiles. Despite the U.S. imposing tariffs on Chinese imports, Beijing has used its position as the world's factory to find new avenues of trade and to insulate itself from the full impact of tariff-induced disruptions. Beijing has also worked aggressively to strengthen its trade relationships with countries outside the U.S. sphere of influence. The Belt and Road Initiative (BRI) is a prime example of this strategy, as it seeks to forge closer ties with developing economies in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. China has committed billions in investments to these regions, effectively expanding its trade network while bypassing some of the barriers created by U.S. tariffs. This diversification of trade routes has proven effective, as China has not only maintained strong growth in export markets but has also reduced its dependency on the U.S. As a result, Beijing's ability to continue growth in the face of American tariffs has been enhanced, and it is unlikely that China will back down just because of economic pressure from the U.S. While economic motivations are essential, it is also crucial to understand the political and strategic factors that inform China's steadfastness in the face of U.S. tariffs. This trade war is far from a mere economic dispute. It is about the future direction of global leadership, national sovereignty, and China's place in the international order. Domestic politics and Xi Jinping's vision. The political environment in China is one of strong centralized leadership, with President Xi Jinping at the helm. Since taking power, Xi has emphasized a vision for China's resurgence as a global superpower. Under his leadership, the Chinese Communist Party has framed the trade war with the U.S. as an opportunity to reinforce its vision of national rejuvenation. The tariffs imposed by the U.S. are portrayed not just as an economic issue but as an external challenge to China's sovereignty. Xi's economic vision, embodied in initiatives like the Made in China 2025 strategy, aims to reduce China's dependency on foreign technologies and innovation. Yielding to U.S. tariffs would contradict this vision, sending a message that China is willing to make concessions to external forces. This would undermine Xi's political narrative, potentially eroding domestic support and political legitimacy. In a nation where political stability is paramount, showing weakness in the face of foreign pressure is politically risky. In fact, China's leadership has used the trade war to bolster domestic nationalism, positioning China as a victim of unfair trade practices while also rallying citizens around the government's resolve to stand up to the U.S. This tactic has been crucial in maintaining support among the Chinese populace, who view the trade war as a national struggle against foreign interference. Beyond domestic politics, the refusal to back down on tariffs also reflects China's broader geopolitical aspirations. Beijing sees the trade war as part of a larger struggle for global influence, particularly as the U.S. seeks to maintain its position as the dominant global power. By standing firm, China is asserting that it will not be easily pushed around by the U.S. or any other Western power. One of the key geopolitical goals of China is to displace the U.S. as the central player in the global economic system. The U.S.-China trade war is part of this broader struggle for power. If China were to back down on tariffs, it would send a signal to other nations that Beijing can be easily swayed by U.S. economic pressure. This would undermine China's influence in global trade and politics. As part of this geopolitical positioning, China has been actively pursuing new trade agreements with countries outside the U.S.-dominated trade system. The China-EU Comprehensive Agreement on Investment, as well as bilateral trade deals with nations in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, demonstrate China's strategy of diversifying its trade relationships. In this way, Beijing is positioning itself as a key player in the global economy, unshackled from U.S. influence. BBC 2025. While the U.S. has used tariffs as a tool to try and exert economic pressure on China, the consequences for the U.S. economy have been more complex than anticipated. The tariff war has exposed the vulnerabilities in the U.S. economy, and its impact on American businesses and consumers cannot be ignored. Impact on U.S. businesses and consumers. One of the main objectives of the U.S. tariffs was to reduce the trade deficit with China. However, the tariffs have also placed a significant burden on U.S. businesses that rely on Chinese imports for raw materials, components, and finished goods. For instance, U.S. companies in the automotive and electronics industries, which depend on Chinese imports, have faced higher costs due to the tariffs. These businesses are now forced to either absorb these costs or pass them on to consumers, which can lead to inflationary pressures. The rise in costs is particularly significant for U.S. consumers who have grown accustomed to low-cost Chinese goods. From electronics to clothing, tariffs on Chinese imports have led to price increases across a wide range of products. This rise in prices could dampen consumer spending, which is a key driver of the U.S. economy. The uncertainty surrounding the trade war has created significant volatility in the U.S. financial markets. Initially, the U.S. stock market appeared resilient, but the longer the trade war continued, the more the market began to react to the potential long-term consequences. Investor sentiment was shaken as the prospects of a prolonged trade war dragged on, and businesses were uncertain about the impact of higher costs, shifting supply chains, and changing market conditions. The uncertainty also contributed to a slowdown in U.S. business investment. Companies unsure about the future of U.S.-China relations have been hesitant to make long-term investments or commit to new projects. This lack of confidence in the economic outlook has added a layer of instability to the U.S. economy at a time when stability is crucial for growth. Moreover, the tariffs have not only affected U.S. businesses but have also strained relationships with U.S. allies. Countries that are part of the global supply chain have been caught in the middle of the trade conflict, and many of them have been forced to adapt to the changing trade landscape. This has created challenges for U.S. diplomatic and economic relations, further complicating the impact of the tariffs. Bloomberg 2025. The U.S.-China trade war has far-reaching consequences that extend well beyond the two countries involved. The global economy is intricately connected, and disruptions to U.S.-China trade relations have had a ripple effect throughout the world. Impact on global supply chains. China is an essential player in the global manufacturing ecosystem. U.S. companies as well as companies from other countries rely on Chinese manufacturing for key components and finished goods. The tariffs have disrupted these global supply chains, forcing businesses to seek alternative suppliers or move their manufacturing operations to other countries. However, China's dominance in many sectors makes it difficult for businesses to find suitable replacements, especially in industries such as electronics and consumer goods. Countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, and India have become attractive alternatives for companies looking to shift production away from China. However, these countries do not yet have the same level of manufacturing infrastructure, skills, and capabilities as China. Moving production to these countries requires substantial investment and time, which creates disruptions in the short term. The impact on smaller economies. Smaller economies that rely heavily on trade with both the U.S. and China are also feeling the effects of the trade war. Countries like South Korea, Mexico, and Germany have seen their own exports affected by the tariff conflict as global supply chains have been disrupted. Additionally, many of these countries find themselves caught in the middle, facing pressure from both the U.S. and China to take sides in the dispute. At the same time, China's growing economic influence in other parts of the world, particularly in Africa and Latin America, has allowed Beijing to sidestep some of the effects of the U.S. tariffs. By deepening trade ties with these regions, China has been able to maintain its economic growth despite the challenges posed by the trade war. Financial Times, 2025. Part 5. Conclusion. What does the future hold? Looking ahead, the future of the U.S.-China trade war remains uncertain, but it is clear that both nations are prepared to continue the standoff. While the U.S. aims to curb China's economic rise, particularly in technology, Beijing is equally determined to maintain its trajectory toward becoming a global economic powerhouse. The U.S. needs to reevaluate its strategy. For the U.S., the continued pursuit of tariffs without a clear path to resolution may prove increasingly costly. The trade war has created significant uncertainty in both the U.S. economy and the global financial system. The longer the trade conflict persists, the greater the potential long-term costs to American businesses and consumers. China's resilience and strategic goals. China, on the other hand, is unlikely to back down. The country's focus on self-reliance and its commitment to strategic industries like AI, clean energy, and advanced manufacturing ensure that Beijing will continue to pursue its vision of economic independence and global leadership. In conclusion, while the trade war may have temporary economic consequences for both sides, it is clear that China will not be easily swayed. Both nations face complex decisions ahead, but for now, the tariffs remain a defining issue in the U.S.-China relationship.